Greet our friends everywhere with Chapter 27 of To Ask No Man, the story of George Mueller's incredible adventure with God. This is another in the series Stories of Great Christians, brought to you by the Moody Bible Institute of Chicago.
In 1872, two things happened in George Mueller's life. He officially opened his biggest orphanage, an immense three-story dormitory housing almost 1,000 orphans. 1 month later, his wife died. George was then 65. I suppose most people thought that his life was about over. But they didn't know George. A year and a half later, he married again. Susanna Grace Sanger, whom he had known for 25 years, a woman in her 40s, bustling with energy, good health, and dedication to God's work. And 3 years after that, George realized the dream of his youth. He set out to preach the gospel around the world. From the time he was 70 until he was 85, he traveled with Susanna, traveled 200,000 miles, and preached in 42 countries. In America, he talked to President Hayes and preached to Yale. In Leningrad, he was personally welcomed by the princes. In India, he preached to thousands of Hindus. But when he was in India, in 1890, Jim Wright wired from Bristol that Lydia, his daughter, was dead. So George and Susanna made the tedious trek back across the Pacific, across the United States, across the Atlantic, back to Ashley Downs.
Here is where I belong, Susanna. Here is where I intend to stay. Jim needs me.
Jim doesn't need you, George. He said so.
Susanna, you forget. We left India for Jim.
I'm not forgetting, but we've been back 4 months. We've seen Jim over the worst of things.
Oh, he's still not himself.
Of course not, but can we make up his loss? Well, of course we can, no matter how long we stay or how many rides we take him on or meals we invite him to.
Well, but the orphans, they need me.
Now, George, if you were gone, would their meals get cooked?
Yeah, but...
Would their classes go on?
Yeah, Susanna, it's the administration.
The same administration details Jim has handled for 15 years while you've been all over the world. 15 years, George. As long as you ran the Wilson Street homes.
But the money, Susanna. Will the money come in?
So, George Mueller, you think God hears just your prayers? And hears them only when you're here on Ashley Downs?
Nine.
The money will come in, whether you're standing here on the front lawn of your orphanages or whether you're preaching in Heidelberg. George, how can you refuse those invitations to go back to Germany?
And Switzerland. There was one from Constance, you know.
What would Paul do?
Well, Paul was not half my age. Besides, Susanna, all this traveling, preaching to 2,000 in one hall, 500 in the next city, what is it really worth? Suppose somebody asks me, what good has it all done?
Just say you don't know.
What's that?
You don't know, and I don't know. Nobody does. Now. But God knows. And sometime we will too.
Ah, Susanna, you are right. Always you are right. But leave my orphans. There's such a pull to stay.
Oh, George.
And such a pull to travel till I drop, preaching salvation through faith in Christ. Well, there's not much time left. I better decide soon. So this is the cell. This is where they jailed John Huss.
At first it doesn't seem so bad, does it? Out here on the pretty little island. There's a window in the tower, too.
What a privilege to see it.
And you can see Constance from here. The Alps. Look, George.
Huss never saw them.
He didn't.
Have you forgotten? He was back against this wall, right here, night and day, chained so he couldn't move.
Horrible.
How good God is to Mueller. 200 years later, I stand here. A man free to preach from the open Bible in the same city that burned John Huss. Heimersleben hasn't changed, Susanna. There's the old mill.
Are we going by your house, George?
Around the next bend. Thank God in heaven. He brought me back again. Look, the carriage shop.
Will there be anybody you know?
I was here when I was 10, then back and forth from school for vacation. There ought to be. After all, my family and... there, we crossed the last bridge now.
They'll remember you?
Whether they remember or not doesn't matter. I remember how I was then. Stealing, carousing, laughing at God. Now I come back to Heimersleben to witness for God. The same God I dishonored when I lived here.
Yes, George.
Susanna, now at last, there's something that says, George Mueller, your life is pretty well completed. You have come the full circle.
But it was Susanna's life that was completed first. After a year and a half in Germany and Switzerland, after 3 years back in Bristol, Susanna died in 1894. George was 89.
So this is how it is, Jim.
Lydia gone.
Susanna gone. Just two lonely old men.
Sitting up here on Ashley Downs, looking out at Bristol.
Remembering all the years.
Counting our blessings.
Remembering what God has done. Just two lonely old men.
Yes.
Such a day to remember. The breezes blowing in from the sea. What was it Lydia used to say? A wide open place with breezes. And a chance to smell the sea once in a while. Well, God found it for us, didn't he?
Yes, he found it, brought us the money, and built this small village for his orphans, George.
2,000 of them. Remember the days we had to pray for bread and milk to feed 30?
Yes, they called you crazy and revolutionary when you told them the almshouses were for bad children. But you knew.
God knew.
Yes, and now all over England, orphanages.
And someday, who knows? God may even put better thoughts into men's minds. Maybe there will come a day when the homeless ones won't need these buildings.
Could anything be better than this, George?
Who knows today? All I can pray is that whoever comes after won't hold on to yesterday's ways. That they'll listen to God's voice, no matter how it comes.
Yes, this is a day for philosophizing.
Why not? Remembering is for lonely old men. What else?
Mr. Mueller, Mr. Mueller!
Now, what's that?
Mr. Mueller, you have to fix it.
It looks like that Peter Henderson. I'm not sure. They all look alike.
You have to fix it.
Now, fix what?
Well, Jeremy poked Jackie, and Jackie turned around, and he reached out, and look, Mr. Mueller, it's my boat all smashed up.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
One of the old boys said you always used to fix boats or anything else that got smashed.
An old boy?
Must have been Cortland. He stopped around yesterday.
Well, it's been some time.
Please, Mr. Mueller.
I'll see what I can do. Jim, you hold the sail, so.
Can you fix it, Mr. Mueller? Can you?
I think so. Hold it steady, Jim.
Mr. Mueller, I just don't know what we'd do without you around here.
You hear that, Jim? I think I was wrong. We may be old, but not so lonely. I think we'll never be lonely as long as we have our Peter and all the rest like him.
I don't like it, George. You've been ailing for the last month.
Jim, right, that's not true.
Please, call a doctor. At least have somebody staying with you all the time.
So I need a nursemaid?
No. Yes, you do. In the middle of the night, if anything happened...
Don't bully me. You're not too young yourself, and don't forget it. You're 73 years old, if I can still track straight.
20 years younger than you are, George Mueller.
Nursemaid, bah.
Well, I won't argue, but you may be sorry.
Jim.
George? What is it? You're sick.
No. Come in a minute.
You are sick.
Nine. Just weak. A little dizzy.
George,
It'll pass. Just now when I was dressing, I almost fainted.
I'll get a doctor right away.
3 times. Each time I rested. Jim, I guess you were right. What you said the other day.
Somebody ought to be with you.
A terrible thing to come to. But you are right.
Yes, I'll find somebody today.
I give in. This morning frightened me.
George, are you doing correspondence?
Why not?
But this morning...
This morning I feel wonderful.
Well, you ought to be resting.
Nonsense. Forget the other. I don't need a nursemaid.
George, please.
No. Go away now. I have at least 10 letters to write.
Well, if you won't have somebody with you, at least rest more.
Take to my bed, is that it?
No, just sleep later in the morning. This business of getting up at 5:30, at your age.
What would happen to the correspondence if I didn't?
It'd get done. I'd do it.
You?
Yes. I can start getting here earlier, take an earlier train from Charlotte Street.
Well,
That's what I'll do.
it's up to you.
Now you're talking sense. I'll get here at 7:30 at the latest, and then you can sleep longer. I'll begin tomorrow morning.
So soon?
I'll be up on the early train tomorrow.
Well, we'll see. Right now, we say nothing so definite about tomorrow. Now I must get along with my work here.
Oh, Mr. Wright, you did give me a start. You're up here awful early.
From now on, you may expect me at this time, Nancy. Mr. Mueller up yet?
I haven't heard a sound yet, Mr. Wright.
It's after 7. Say, why don't you slip up in there like a good girl with a pot of tea? Leave it on his table, then slip out again quietly.
All right, sir. Here's some for you.
Thank you so much. Now, remember, you go in quietly.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mueller! Oh, that sakes, he's on the floor. Mr. Wright, come here, quick!
But at 93, George Mueller was dead.
That the glory of God might be seen by the whole world and the whole church of God. That yet in these days God answers prayers, and that God is the same in power and love that he ever was. To illustrate that, I have devoted my whole life.
George Mueller must be happy about his orphanages today. They still shelter dependent, parentless children in Bristol, England. And they still give the boys and girls a solid background in the fundamentals of Christian faith. But just as George prayed, they have not held to the ideas of yesterday. In the spring of '58, the huge dormitories that he built were sold. All the children are now housed in small cottages that attempt to simulate the atmosphere of a normal Christian home. Headquarters for the work in downtown Bristol is a large, up-to-date building called simply Mueller House. And so we conclude the final chapter of To Ask No Man, the story of George Mueller's incredible adventure with God. The script was written by Faith Cox Bailey and produced by Jim Grant. George Mueller was portrayed by Ted Seeley. Others featured in the cast were Walter Carlson, Irene Kennedy, Joyce Blackburn, John Rader, Rex Brenner, Louise Kearley, and Millie Sawyer. Sound effects were by John McComb, and music was by Lucille Ingebretson. Your announcer, Bill Pierce. This has been another in the series Stories of Great Christians, which come to you transcribed from the Moody Bible Institute of Chicago.